China's capital, Beijing, presents a familiar scene of carefully choreographed diplomacy. Inside a conference hall known for hosting international forums, representatives from governments, policy institutes, academic circles and businesses are gathered. The atmosphere is formal, measured and attentive. Delegates sit in neat rows, microphones and translation earpieces in place. The event is structured to broadcast a message. China is engaging internationally on its terms, speaking within a framework that emphasizes cooperation, global order, and the global role Beijing believes it now holds. The room quiets as China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi steps toward the stage. The moment is not simply ceremonial. It arrives just days before a highly anticipated meeting between US President Donald Trump and China's President Xi Jinping, scheduled to take place during the presidential visit to South Korea. The timing gives Wang Yi's remarks an added layer of diplomatic weight, even though they are delivered in a setting that appears to focus on broader global governance topics. His entrance is deliberate, steady and calm. The forum itself does not carry the visual drama of a summit or a negotiation table. Instead, it is an environment of speeches, listening and interpretation. But diplomacy often happens first in tone, language and positioning before talks begin at the highest levels. Wang Yi begins speaking about the current state of multilateralism. His statements reflect concerns long voiced by Beijing regarding what it sees as instability within the international system. He says in Mandarin with measured emphasis that frequently withdrawing from agreements and reneging on commitments while enthusiastically forming blocs and cliques has subjected multilateralism to unprecedented challenges. The audience remains quiet as translation devices carry the message across languages. The phrasing points to recent global developments, shifting alliances, redefined treaty obligations, and rising strategic competition among major powers. Then he continues, yet the tide of history cannot be reversed. A multipolar world is coming. The statement is direct. It reflects China's long-standing diplomatic position that global power should not center around one dominant country or bloc, but instead be shared across multiple national and regional centers. For China, the concept of a multipolar world is tied to its own rise. It suggests that no single country should dictate the norms, rules, or economic conditions that govern global affairs. The room listens as he elaborates. The remarks carry a dual message, one outward, one inward. Outwardly, they assert China's vision for the international system. Inwardly, they reinforce to domestic and diplomatic audiences that China remains confident in its trajectory and its global standing, even as it faces economic competition and security pressures. As Wang Yi continues, he touches on the use of power in international politics. He warns that if we blindly believe that might is right and condone bullying through power, we will only push the world toward the law of the jungle, where the weak are preyed upon by the strong. The translation continues smoothly across the hall. He adds that such behavior will only undermine the very foundations of the international system and its rules. The phrasing is familiar in diplomatic settings, where language is often carefully selected to signal concerns without naming specific countries. Yet the audience understands the implication. The United States remains the world's strongest military and economic power, and Beijing frequently argues that unilateral decisions or coercive economic actions by Washington have global repercussions. Wang Yi continues the speech with a call to stop politicizing trade. In his words, we call for an end to politicizing economic and trade issues, artificially fragmenting global markets, and resorting to trade wars and tariff battles. These remarks connect to ongoing debates over tariffs, market access, supply chain resilience, and export controls, issues that both Washington and Beijing have contended with throughout recent years. Trade is no longer simply commercial. It intersects with national security, technology policy, and industrial strategy. This speech, delivered calmly, is layered in context. It happens at a moment when global markets are adjusting to continued tariffs and new restrictions affecting key sectors, including semiconductors, advanced manufacturing equipment, and emerging technologies. It occurs while the United States continues to build strategic partnerships across the Indo-Pacific, strengthening ties with Japan, South Korea, Australia, India, and others. And it happens as China builds its own networks across Asia, Africa, Latin America, and the Middle East through infrastructure partnerships, diplomatic outreach, and top-level bilateral visits. China frames the multipolar concept as one where developing countries, emerging economies, and non-Western regional blocs gain a greater say in setting global agendas. In Beijing's perspective, global governance should reflect a wider balance of voices, interests, and priorities. This concept aligns with China's diplomatic messaging in institutions such as the United Nations, the BRICS grouping, and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. It also relates to China's major international initiatives, including infrastructure and development programs that link global investments and trade corridors. The message of a multipolar world also intersects with domestic communications about China's own development model. Beijing positions itself as a state capable of long-term strategic planning, infrastructure-led growth and modernization on a scale that, by its own emphasis, is unprecedented in history. The narrative places China as both a beneficiary and a contributor to global economic stability, while presenting its governance system as distinct from and not subordinate to Western political models. At the same time, Wang Yi's reference to blocs and cliques reflects concerns over new geopolitical alignments. Washington has strengthened partnerships with NATO allies and Indo-Pacific partners. Joint security exercises, arms sales agreements, and strategic dialogues have increased. Meanwhile, China has deepened ties with countries that share interests in stability, trade expansion, or multipolar diplomacy. These parallel dynamics are shaping a world where cooperation and competition overlap. Just days from now, the upcoming meeting between President Trump and President Xi Jinping is expected to address trade, security, and diplomatic relationships. Such meetings are closely watched for shifts in tone, policy, or strategic posture. While neither side is expected to resolve long-standing differences in a single discussion, the meeting is seen as an important moment to assess how both countries envision the future of bilateral relations. The remarks today serve as a form of positioning before that conversation begins. Returning to the forum, the environment remains orderly. Delegates take notes, some exchange quiet comments. The remarks reflect an ongoing pattern in China's diplomatic messaging, emphasizing dialogue, stability, development, and sovereignty, while raising concerns about unilateral policies and power-based diplomacy. The speech does not escalate rhetoric, but signals negotiating positions through narrative framing. In global diplomacy, messages like these contribute to the atmosphere in which negotiations take place. Before national leaders sit down to speak, their ministers, advisors, and spokespersons shape expectations and boundaries. Talking points are established publicly, even while private communication channels remain active behind the scenes. Diplomatic signaling is rarely about a single speech. Rather, it is part of a longer sequence of statements, meetings, working-level consultations, and strategic planning. China continues to highlight development as a foundation for global cooperation. The message points to shared economic interests, trade interdependence, and collective global challenges such as climate policy, public health, and financial stability. Beijing frequently argues that a stable global economy benefits all states, while economic division or strategic decoupling risks undermining growth and security. These themes are mentioned indirectly through appeals to avoid trade politicization and market fragmentation. At the same time, the reality of global competition remains. The United States and China are engaged in what many describe as strategic rivalry. Both nations seek influence in global institutions. Both are shaping alliances and partnerships. Both are advancing national technology strategies, yet both also remain deeply linked through trade, investment, supply chains, and macroeconomic interdependence. The upcoming presidential meeting underscores this duality: cooperation where possible, competition where necessary, and dialogue as a mechanism to manage both. As the event concludes, the speech leaves behind a framework for interpretation. The world, Wang Yi says, is moving toward multiple centers of power. China presents itself as one of those centers, advocating for a more inclusive and diversified international system. The United States continues to assert leadership within existing alliances and global governance structures. Countries across the world navigate these dynamics based on their own interests, regional contexts, and political priorities. Diplomacy in this moment remains a balance of influence, communication, and endurance. The forum in Beijing is one step in a longer process. The upcoming talks between President Trump and President Xi Jinping are another. Global diplomacy operates on long timelines, and this speech contributes to the shaping of expectations, perceptions, and strategic assumptions going forward. The hall begins to disperse, with delegates stepping out into corridors where conversations continue in quieter tones. The message delivered today will be analysed by officials, advisors, and diplomats across multiple capitals. It enters the broader dialogue shaping how leading nations approach global governance, trade, and security. The statement, "A multipolar world is coming," remains one of the defining lines of the event. It is not only a description, but also a declaration of how China sees the direction of global change. In the days ahead, international attention will shift to the presidential meeting. Today's remarks stand as part of the diplomatic groundwork laid before that encounter takes place.